I'm Craig Timm, and this is ACAMS Live. Thank you to everyone out there who's tuning in today from all around the world. I can see a number of you jumping in and telling us where you're from. That's great. Feel free to say hello in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from. If you've got a question or a comment, you can put that in the chat as well. We'll try to work those in to our discussion where we can. But June 15th is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, and it's a day dedicated to raising awareness about the abuse, neglect, and exploitation that many older adults face. In the United States, as many as 1 in 10 Americans experience some form of abuse every year. And this abuse can take many forms. So it can be physical, emotional, financial, sexual, and neglect. Given our audience today is likely mostly financial crime fighters, we're going to focus in on that financial aspect of the abuse. But I think what you'll often find is that when you're looking at something like fraud, there's often more than one type of abuse that's going on. So to raise awareness and hopefully help all of us lead this discussion and be better able to do our part to fight elder abuse and elder fraud, I am joined today by Clark-Flynt-Barr, Government Affairs Director, Financial Security for AARP. I imagine most of our American viewers are probably familiar with AARP, but many of our non-US viewers might not be. So I'll have Clark give us some more details in a minute. But AARP is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization with over 38 million members dedicated to serving the interests of older Americans. Prior to joining AARP, Clark was an intelligence analyst with the FBI, senior policy advisor with Chainalysis, and the chief operating officer for the Association for Women in Cryptocurrency. So she's got real financial crime chops. Clark, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate that you're doing this event. Fraud and financial abuse is such an important issue and something that our members care about a lot, but it really affects everyone. So really pleased to be here today.
Well, great. Let's jump right in, and let's just start with a little bit of background on AARP, because I've seen, people from Bangladesh, I see Estonia, I see Dubai, and I imagine a lot of them don't really know that much about AARP. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit about the organization, what it does, and then what you do within the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So AARP is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, as you said, Craig. We represent and advocate for the interests of the 100 million people in the US who are over the age of 50. Folks may remember when we were called the American Association for Retired Persons, but now we are just AARP because we represent the 50 plus. So there's a lot of folks who are still working. So that's my one fun fact for folks in the US who may not have known. AARP doesn't stand for anything anymore. It's a big organization. We have offices in all 50 states, plus Puerto Rico, DC, and the Virgin Islands. And I think if you're in the US, you might be familiar with the discounts that we offer. But we do a lot more than that. We have a foundation which represents older adults in court and represents their interests in court. We do a tremendous amount of research and polling on things that are important to our members, like caregiving, Medicare, Social Security, retirement issues, fraud. And we also have a lot of resources for folks who are looking to shift careers later in their life and maybe get more training or resources for that. Or if you're younger, if you want to try to make sure that you have enough money for retirement, we have a great retirement calculator so you can see whether or not you're on track with what you're saving. And we also help people navigate things like caring for aging parents. I think we'll probably talk about our Fraud Watch network and Bank Safe initiatives later, but we also have those. And then I sit on the government affairs team here, which is our advocacy arm. And I'm on the financial security team, as you mentioned. So AARP does advocate on a lot of different issues, including housing and caregiving and safe streets, like ensuring that people have access to transportation, things like that. I cover retirement, fraud, consumer protection issues. So a large part of what I've been working on is fraud prevention policies. So I'm very pleased to be here.
Great. So The work that you do and your organization does is so interesting because you're engaging with a group that is, particularly vulnerable to these fraud schemes. Older adults, we know, while these schemes can affect everybody, they're often targeted, they're often victimized at a higher rate. And so, they're your members. You get this unique view in terms of seeing it from their perspective. So I'm wondering if you could just start by telling us, in terms of the latest trends, what are you seeing? What are you hearing from victims in terms of the latest fraud schemes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say first, unfortunately, what we have seen is the amount of fraud that is happening is still on the rise. So there's both a big increase in the number of complaints made to law enforcement, as well as in the amount of losses. The FBI puts out a report every year, which your folks who are watching might be familiar with, their IC3 annual reports. And even I was surprised when I read the most recent one, because there's been such a big jump in the amount of money that's been stolen from people. In 2024, it was $16.6 billion. If you compare that with a decade early, 2014, it was about 800 million. So that's like a 2,000% increase, if my math is right. And I try not to do math publicly. Um, but yeah, and a lot of that money was stolen from older adults, as you mentioned, 4.8 billion. And the average amount that older folks had stolen from them was a lot more, and that increased as well. So it's $83,000 is the average amount that people over 60 had stolen from them, which is a big increase from 34,000 in 2023. And I think this really reflects the way that fraud has become this like professionalized, transnational, organized crime endeavor, right? Like we're hearing, if you follow Aaron West on LinkedIn, which if you're in the fraud space, I imagine you do, and if you don't, you should. You're hearing about these big scam compounds in Cambodia. There's call centers in India that are just operating around scamming people. Even Mexican cartels have gotten in on this because it's frankly safer than trafficking drugs. So we've seen this real professionalization of fraud. It's not, I think maybe sometimes there's this stereotypical sense that it's like some kid in his mom's basement, but that's certainly not what this is anymore. And we're seeing that reflected in the amounts that are stolen from people. On the Fraud Watch Network, specifically, what AARP is seeing is an uptick in romance scams. We've seen a big increase in those this year. We have been seeing for the past 2 years or so a big uptick in people who are being directed to send money via crypto ATMs. So they'll be told to go to their bank and take out money and feed it into these cryptocurrency ATMs. Whereas perhaps before they were being told to send wires or buy gift cards. We still see some of that, but the crypto ATMs are certainly a big trend there. We also always see criminals be very good at taking advantage of whatever is in the news. So during tax season, we see an uptick in tax scams. During the California wildfires, there was a big uptick in charity scams. When the Pope died, there were Pope-related scams, which amazed me. We've seen scams recently with Joanne Fabrics closing. We've seen scams related to that. Celebrity impersonation is another big one, and whoever's sort of in the news. So like Elon Musk has been in the news a lot recently. We've seen a big uptick in Elon Musk impersonation scams, which has been interesting. We also are continuing to hear about recovery scams. So once people have realized that they have been the victim of fraud, they will then receive additional outreach, presumably from the same criminals, but I suppose it could be different people that they could be selling the lists. And they're told, if you want to expedite your case, you can just pay this fee, and we will help to speed up your case. And sometimes it's like people who are pretending to be crypto recovery companies. Sometimes it's people who are impersonating law enforcement. We spoke to a woman recently who said she was about to get on a call with a U.S. attorney, and she had to pay $1,000 to get her case expedited. No, that's a scam. So those are unfortunately really common. The other thing that's very common is for people to, once they have no more money to send to the criminals, to be used in other ways. So becoming a money mule is very typical. If you don't have any funds left, you'll be asked to move money through your own bank accounts, or you might be asked to go pick up money from other people who you may not know they're scam victims, but they are. So yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot happening.
So you've given me a couple things I want to dig into there. One, first, I just want to make a comment on the recovery scams. So this is, I forget the exact number, but I want to say I've seen something like 30% of victims are re-victimized. So when you think about, like, if you're in a financial institution out there, like, we all know these scams are really hard to detect, especially when your victim wants to do it. They believe it. But one way it seems like we could have a huge impact is after it's out, just warning the victim and saying, hey, you are incredibly likely to be re-victimized. If we could knock that 30% down to single digits, that's a huge impact with already known knowns. Like, we don't have to do any fancy monitoring or anything else. Like, that seems to me to be the low-hanging fruit where we could get a huge bang for our buck.
Absolutely. Yeah. And hopefully that's something that banks are aware of and are able to educate folks on. But I think that's a great idea, having more of an education campaign once you know your customers have been the victims of fraud, making sure they know, like, these are the ways this can sort of continue.
So we also have a question from, or we have a question/comment I see coming in from Gary about the crypto ATMs and talking about how, this is designed to get it away from the banks. Maybe you could just talk us through, like, a hypothetical flow from victim to bad guy. Like, I know there's not one example, but what does that kind of look like in terms of the institutions and how the money moves?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I think the most common thing we hear about is people are directed to go take funds out of their bank. They're coached what to say. They may be told to stay on the phone, so they might have an earbud in their ear and are being coached actively by the scammer who's telling them, um, you know, they're going to ask you these questions when you say you want to take out $30,000. Tell them it's for this. And if they ask more questions, be very firm, and they'll coach them through the whole process. And they sort of know at this point what banks are going to ask them and are helping to try to circumvent that. And I do hear from a lot of folks who work from banks where they know or they believe that people are being sent to these crypto ATMs after taking money out, and they're just sort of at their wits' end, not being able to convince folks that they believe they're being scammed. So I know I'm very sympathetic to the fact that it's really challenging, especially when people are sort of what we call under the ether, and they really are wrapped up in the scam and believe that it's real, that it's not a scam. So in any case, we'll see people be directed to their banks, coached through how to take the money out, and then sent to different crypto ATMs. Depending on the company, they have different daily transaction limits. And depending on the state now, too, there's actually 15 states that have passed laws related to crypto ATMs. And often those include some sort of daily transaction limit to try to stem the amount of money that can be stolen from you so quickly. And so they may be directed to multiple cryptocurrency ATMs to deposit funds. In other types of scams that involve crypto, we'll see where folks will take money out of their retirement accounts, for example, and transfer that to a bank. In one case, where I was talking to this woman's husband who had been the victim, they were saying that he was then instructed to send the money to a prominent cryptocurrency exchange, but his bank said no. And so then the scammer told him he had to open an account at another bank that was viewed as more crypto friendly. It was a smaller bank. So he transferred the money to that second bank. And from that bank, he then transferred it to the cryptocurrency platform, and then to the criminals, unfortunately. And it was a lot of money. It was, I think, $750,000. So there's a lot of different financial institutions that are somewhere in the chain.
Yeah, it just illustrates how they're always looking for the weak link. And I know Australia just recently passed some new requirements for crypto ATMs. So it's something definitely to keep an eye on. Something struck me when you were talking, so far, when you were talking about the fraud stats and you said, the amount of money stolen from, and you used that word stolen from a couple times to describe the money taken from victims instead of what I think we might often say is losses. And it struck me as one, that's a better way to describe it. Losses implies, like, even if unintentionally, some sort of fault by the victim, right? Like, I lost my keys or something, right? Like, it's my fault. When the blame should be squarely on the criminal. So I guess one, is that intentional? I'm assuming it probably is, in how you're thinking about it, and trying to create an environment that destigmatizes, being a victim. And then two, are there any other examples of words that you hear out there that you just cringe when people use, like, no, like, this is a better way to describe that?
Yes, absolutely. And I appreciate you noticing that. And I try to be very purposeful in the words that I'm using. I slip up. I certainly make mistakes, but AARP has done a lot of research on how to talk to and about fraud victims and what to say to them. We actually have a website dedicated to this. It's aarp.org/words matter. And so, as you said, we'll often hear folks talk about people having lost money or fallen from a scam. And we really encourage people to use language that shifts the blame to the criminal. They didn't lose money, they had money stolen from them by a criminal. They didn't fall for it, they had a criminal steal their money. And we also try to use the word criminal rather than fraudster or scammer. But again, I know I slip up there. But we believe using criminal rather than scammer or fraudster really better reflects the seriousness of the crime, and reassures the victim that, like, this is not you doing something silly. Like, these are professional criminals who have figured out how to convince you that you should send them money, and that is what happened, right? And I think we know that fraud numbers are underreported, and one of the ways that we think we can help to encourage better reporting to law enforcement, which will allow them to better prioritize the cases they're working on, is by using language that is not victim blaming, and reassuring people this happens to everyone, because it does.
I love that. Words matter. So we put a link in the chat now. Check that out, because I think that's, again, it's like, these are hard problems. And, taking down scam centers, you mentioned Aaron West earlier. Operation Shamrock's another great group to look at. They're a global organization. Those are big things and big, important challenges, but there are little things we can all do, like the language, like, talking to people who have been victimized and letting them know about re-victimized. There are things we can all do that's a little bit easier to make a difference. And I love that. Now, you've mentioned a couple times the different resources that AARP has, and I want to ask about those now, particularly for victims, because, these resources, as I understand it, are free to everyone around the world, largely, or maybe completely, regardless of whether you're an AARP member. So I know we've got people here, not from just the United States, but literally everywhere. So these are things that everyone who's listening today, I think, can take advantage of. So maybe if you could give us a couple of examples of these and how people can use them and how they're helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So our Fraud Watch network runs a helpline, and that is free, as you said, for anyone to call. You don't have to be a certain age. You don't have to be an AARP member. I think a lot of the resources that they will provide are U.S. centric. So if you're abroad, they'll be able to help you figure out, is this a scam? Is it not? They'll be able to talk to you about how to next steps to take, as we would do in the U.S. In terms of reporting, for example. And one of the things they often do is help victims put together what they're going to report to law enforcement. So making sure it's got all of the relevant information so law enforcement can start working on that quickly. So you want your report to, instead of saying, like, somebody called me and told me that I owed taxes and so I sent them $30,000, you want to have, like, this is the phone number that called me, this is the date, this is the time, this is how they told me to get the money, if there's bank accounts involved or cryptocurrency addresses involved, having all of that ready so that they have more actionable information quickly. because we know money moves so fast, is really important. So the helpline will help you with that. We also have online support groups, and these are intended to be for people who have either been the victims of fraud or their family members. We often find in these groups that it's really helpful to speak with other people who have been through something that's similar to you, and understand. And I think people find the groups very helpful. Selfishly, I also learn about some of the policy issues that are arising. And so the support groups can be helpful in steering AARP's advocacy efforts. For example, we are advocating for this theft loss deduction to be reinstated, because we keep hearing in our support groups that people have money stolen from them and then they owe taxes on that money, which is, I think, just wild to folks to learn that they now owe taxes on money that has been stolen from them. And then the last thing I'll mention is AARP's Bank Safe program. And this is a training program for financial institutions. As the name suggested, it started with banks, but I think they work with a lot of different types of financial institutions. And the focus is frontline workers, and specifically how to identify elder fraud and elder exploitation. So that's another resource that viewers might be interested in.
No, it's really great, because I imagine a lot of people who are listening today, and when people know you're in the space, if you're a doctor, people call and they're like, show you a picture. What is this? Right. But for us, it's like when they know, so we get those calls when like, hey, my friend, my mom was a victim. What do I do? And it's so hard to be able to tell them like, okay, here's what you can do, but the likelihood of success is very difficult. And so, I always say, one, go to your local law enforcement, but they're overwhelmed with fraud. So I think what you guys are doing is so great. And that could make the difference in whether they take up your case or not, whether they can actually do something, or whether it just gets put to the pile aside and like, I can't do anything. So that is, now, maybe think about, what I need some help in before I go to the law enforcement. I need some help in crafting that. I need to understand what I need to tell them, or you need to tell your friends or family members, hey, this is a resource out here. I would go here, look at this quickly, call their line, then go to local law enforcement. The other thing you always, in the United States, but really around the world, is IC3 is the government website, www.ic3.gov. It's run by the FBI. It's the way that you may never have anyone from law enforcement reach out to you. You might, but it's the way that they try to put cases together behind the scenes. They also have a financial fraud kill chain that's happening behind the scenes, where if you report within 48 hours, there's actually a pretty good likelihood that you might get your money back. If it's after 72 hours, it's almost none. So this is like the other thing to emphasize for your friends and family and all this, like, you got to move now. And that's why that victim shaming is so important too, right? Even if it's like takes a couple days to like want to tell somebody that it's probably too late by then.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important point to make, that the faster you can report this, the more likely it is that law enforcement will be able to help you. And so I think educating people about that is really important.
So I've got links to the AARP stuff in there. Look those up, save those so that when you get that call, you've got it. We'll also put in links. I see Rajiv talked about, can you do some more in depth on money laundering, diversion? We've got ACAMS has so many resources there. So I'll put a link to our fraud hub, which gives you sort of a lot that we have around fraud, including our new fraud certification. We can put a link into our new exploitative scams toolkit that talks about exploitative scams, what the financial flows look like. And then we've got, webinars out there on everything money laundering you'll ever want to see. So, so we'll include links in there too. I love that people are, seeing and hearing all this and want more, because it's, hopefully this is the start of something, not the end. Although we are, unfortunately, speaking of the end, we are reaching the end of our time today. So I wanted to give you, Clark, a chance to just talk to our audience directly. We've got people here live. We'll have people that watch over the next several days and weeks. So whether they're in roles as financial crime fighters, which a lot of them will be, or just as a family member, friend, we talked about that, or maybe victims ourselves. Is there either any advice or thoughts you want to leave them with, or a call to action as we start to wrap up?
Yeah, I think spreading the word is incredibly important. And I think it helps to sort of normalize how prevalent this crime is, educating as many people as you possibly can as you're talking about what you're learning, from ACAMS and others about fraud is really important. And I think it's also really important to emphasize fraud impacts everyone. It happens, like, it doesn't matter how old you are, how smart you are, how educated, what demographics you fall into. People in all ages, and the FBI data you mentioned really bears this out. People of all ages are victims of fraud. Older adults have spent their lives saving and have more money, and so they tend to bear the brunt in terms of losses, unfortunately. But really, this can happen to anyone. No one is too smart to fall for crime, and so I think it's really important to be aware of that and to educate folks. And I'll leave you with this, which is a fun Christmas activity. It's not very fun, but this is something I had my family do over Christmas a couple of years ago. Was we all sat down and froze our credit with the various credit bureaus. So doing what you can to also protect yourself, making sure you have the multi-factor authentication, making sure you're taking steps to make yourself less vulnerable is also really important.
Yeah, and Marco, I see you asked a question about government. Should they do more around awareness and all of that? I think absolutely yes, but we should advocate for that. But there, sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes there are budget issues, there are other things. Like, I think the message that Clark is leaving here today, and I think so much of what the work AARP is doing is we can empower you to do as much as you possibly can. Like, let's work together. Let's do what we can, because we can actually make a difference ourselves without having to fully rely on somebody else, while still doing all that advocacy work and doing all the other stuff. There are things we can all do today. So, Clark, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. We really appreciate it. I hope you go do something tangible today, whether it's look at those resources, talk to a family member, to try to make a difference, because that's how we're going to tackle this. And we'll see you next time on ACAMS Live.
Thank you so much for having me.